Welcome to the next installment in my video lecture series for economic analysis of the law. And in this particular video, I'm going to be taking a look at Chapter 9, which is topics in the economics of contract law. And in specifics, I'm going to be looking at Figure 9.1 from your textbook, which is on page 314. So if you remember from the textbook and you're reading that an individual injured their hand, and the injury caused their hand to be 50% of perfection. So they injure their hand, it's 50% relative to a completely functioning hand. A doctor steps in and says, listen, I'll do the surgery on your hand, and I'm going to make it 100% perfect. All right? So that is the promise that is made to the patient by the doctor. But unfortunately, after the surgery, things don't go well, and the hand's actually made worse off. The hand is 25% perfect after surgery. So we have to make sure we realize that this is the expectation of the patient, that I am going to get a 100% perfect hand from this doctor. So damages on the expectation side of things is going to be, I have a 25% perfect hand. I was supposed to get a 100% perfect hand. So that's the calculation of damages would be on that end or from that perspective. And then finally, we also have to realize that because this individual contracted with a specific doctor, that precluded them from going to another doctor. And let's assume that there was another physician out there that they could have gone to who could have done the surgery and returned the hand to 75% perfection. So this lists out the different scenarios that we can look at in a legal sense for how to determine damages. All right, so for the first scenario, we talked about the expectation scenario. All right, the expectations that are occurring, or expectation damages. That is that these damages will be calculated based upon the fact that the contract was fulfilled as stated. So we would calculate these expectation damages based upon the fact that this person has a 25% perfect hand and the doctor promised to give them a 100% perfect hand. So the difference between what they are and what they were contractually promised, and if that contract had been fulfilled, that's what we base the damages upon. We can also calculate damages based upon opportunity cost, meaning that there is an alternate contract, and in this case, there's another doctor that this person could have gone to have the surgery done on their hand. So we're going to have to take a look at that 75% perfection. So what would the damages be for the fact that they have a 25% perfect hand, but another doctor could have given them a 75% perfect hand? And finally, we have the reliance side as if there was no contract. So we would calculate the damages based upon the fact that there is no promise, there is no expectation, there is no alternate contract or alternate doctor out there. What we're going to calculate this on, if we do the reliance damages, is that this person now has a 25% perfect hand, and if they had not gone to the doctor, they would have had a 50% perfect hand. So that's how I want you to realize and understand the differences in these perspectives and how they impact the level of damages. So if we base damages upon expectation, or versus opportunity cost, or versus reliance, how that impacts the level of damages that this individual would receive. So if we take a look, and this is a recreation of figure 9.1 from your textbook on page 314. The one thing I want to point out to you, and if you look closely enough, you'll notice that the scaling on this graph is not perfect. I apologize for this. I attempted to get the scaling just right, but unfortunately it made the graph pretty much unreadable. And I thought it would be better if it was more clear to understand this graphically and then fudge around with the scaling. So just realize that the scaling on the hands condition and the damages is not perfect, and you'll see that later on when we pull up the damages. So just realize that. I'm just doing this to make sure that it accurately looks like the figure in your textbook. So the first thing is, which one of these represents the expectations curve? Well, the expectations curve is the far right curve. And remember, why is this the case? It's because the doctor promised the patient that their hand would be 100% perfect. So if the patient got a 100% perfect hand, their damages would be equal to 0. They got what they were promised, they got their what they expected, and what that expectation curve maps out all of the different hand conditions that are possible and the damages associated with them. So you can see that as the hand becomes less and less perfect, damages get higher and higher. The opportunity curve is the one in the middle, and that is represented there because, as you remember, the opportunity to go to another doctor did not occur. So this person could have gone to another physician who would have performed the surgery and given them a 75% perfect hand. So if the patient contracted with that doctor and got a 75% perfect hand, there would be no damages associated with that. And then for every hand condition below 75%, there would be damages associated with those lesser conditions. And finally, we have the Reliance Curve, and that intersects the hand condition at 50% because that is what the hand looked like, or how well it functioned prior to the surgery. So this is the fact that the hand was at 50%. If a doctor did the surgery and it was still at 50%, there would be no damages. And for every hand condition below 50%, there are damages associated to that. You could look at this as, for example, when we say damages, how much harm the doctor did. The hand was at 50%, and now it is much lower than that. So what was the harm of the surgery that occurred on that particular patient? So let's take a look at how would we calculate these damages. And again, remember, the hands condition scaling is a little bit off and the damages scaling is a little bit off. So remember, the person had 25% perfect hand after the surgery. So we'd go from 25% up to the Reliance Curve, and that would give the monetary amount of damages if we were basing our damages based upon reliance. So the interpretation of this is, this person is indifferent between having a hand that is 25% plus getting $5,000 in damages. So this person gets $5,000 in damages and has a hand of 25% perfection. They would be indifferent between that combination and having a hand at 50%. So what they are doing here, the damages are compensating them for the fact that they've lost 25% of the function or the perfection of that hand. So that $5,000 should compensate the individual for the fact that they have a 25% perfect hand, not versus the 50% perfect hand they had prior to surgery. If we calculate this based upon the opportunity side of this, or the opportunity of going to another doctor, we go from that 25% up to the opportunity curve and across, and that gives us $8,000. So what this tells us is that this individual should be indifferent between getting damages of $8,000 with a hand of 25% versus having a hand of 75%. So this person gets $8,000, has a 25% perfect hand, and that situation, they should be indifferent between having a 75% perfect hand. So they're being compensated. That $8,000 is compensating them for the fact that they could have had functionality of 75% with another doctor, but they only have 25%. So that loss of the 50% functionality or perfection of the hand is worth $8,000 to that individual. And finally, if we go to the expectation curve and straight across, that gives us $10,000. So what this is saying is, if the individual receives damages of $10,000 and has a hand of 25% perfection, they would be indifferent between that damage and the 25% hand and having a 100% perfect hand. So the importance of this is, number one, make sure you're comfortable as to why each curve looks the way it is or is positioned on the graph. Why the expectation curve is the furthest out from the origin? That's because the expectation was a perfectly formed and functioning hand. All right, the Reliance curve is based upon what their hand was like prior to the injury. It was damaged and 50% perfect, versus the opportunity curve, because the doctor in our scenario, the alternate doctor, could have returned that hand to 75% perfection, and realize the impact that that has on that. The expectation was 100% perfectly functioning hand. That did not occur. Therefore, the damages are much higher for expectation versus opportunity. Why? Because the opportunity to go to another doctor and getting a 75% perfect hand, and versus Reliance. Reliance is the lowest end of the damages, because we're particularly looking at the actual harm that the doctor caused. The hand was originally 50%, now it's only 25%, so the individual has to be compensated for the fact that their hand was 50% perfect, but now is only 25% perfect because of the actions of the doctor in question.